Hello, all you wonderful people. It's Mike Green from Dr. Demographics, and welcome to today's podcast. I know I was going to say weekly podcast, but we've been terrible about uploading them. We're going to try to do better. We've got a ton of content that we want to share with you, but we also have a ton of work. So we're trying to balance between, giving you great content like we've always tried to do, and then also balancing, keeping up with all the work that's coming in, trying to help you place your practice in the right spot, give you some demographic data that you need to better run your practice. Obviously, that's always a high priority, the highest priority. But I felt like this time of the year, we're getting to be about the middle of January. We have a lot of senior students that are ready to, go out on their own when they graduate. We have a lot of doctors that are, whatever it is, about getting into the springtime, start thinking, okay, this is the year that I'm going to jump out and I'm going to start my own practice or stop being an associate. I'm going to own, whatever it is. And so we always get a lot of questions this time of year about, what are the specific benchmarks that we should be looking at when we want to start a de novo practice. And it's a really, really important question, and I fully understand it. And yes, we deal with a lot of doctors that are buying existing practices from retiring doctors or failed practices that they're buying and answering those questions. But we have a lot of doctors that are just doing tremendous and they want to build that next practice from de novo. And it's really, really, really important that you watch and hit key benchmarks, or at least from our perspective, that you are finding those spots that have the right benchmarks that are going to be strengths for you and your practice philosophy, your ownership philosophy. These are a lot of the ones that we use for our big group practices that employ us to help them search the country and find, whatever the next great locations are going to be. These are the benchmarks that we use. And so we want to share that with all of you so that you can make some good decisions on what your next great location is going to be in some of the areas that we start. And I should say, these are pretty basic. Obviously we drill down much deeper than all of these, but this is like high level, what we're going to use to start our drill down point when we've identified a few of these locations. So listen to these benchmarks and compare it against what you and your partners may be talking about for your future and where you want to place your next practice. So obviously we always start at growth, and we have spoken many, many times, and Scott has shared many, many times in the past that growth is not the only factor that you should be looking at. But it is a factor, and it's an important factor, and it's one that you really need to pay attention to, because it really tells a huge story about what is happening in that area economically, politically, environmentally, so many things that are going to impact your practice's growth potential. Now, I always say when we talk about growth that we have doctors that are in horrible growing areas that are losing population, and they're doing tremendous. They're killing it. Why? Because they have made up for it in marketing, or they're super charismatic, or they have something else to offer that area, and growth doesn't really matter to them. Then we have other doctors that are in really fast growing areas of this country, and they're not doing that great. Why? Because they're missing out on some of these other things. And so what I'm saying is, don't hang your hat fully on whether an area is growing or not. And you take a sip real quick, and have that be the only decision maker, the only deciding factor when you're making a decision. But let's talk about growth for a second. And so before we look at forecast growth, and most demographers, other companies that are looking only at forecast growth, I actually want to look at the historic growth, because the historic growth tells me something that has been, that is probably going to be a better predictor of what is going to be. Now, of course, there are things that can affect the going to be, but I want to know the has been really, really well. And so typically I will look at a 10-year segment of the growth in that area. what's happened in that 10 years? Has there been big employers move in? Has there been a big influx of immigration possibly for this city or area? What has happened in that 10 years? And then what kind of a story or what kind of a situation has that created? And we have seen many, many times over the different parts of the country where an event or a series of events that have happened in a 10-year span have completely changed the face of that area. A couple right off the head: Boise, Idaho, Houston, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, for completely different reasons. Each of these areas have changed dramatically because of what's happened in the last 10 years. Some of it's environmental, some of it's political, some of it's other factors, job growth, things that have changed the environment of those areas. And so a 10-year segment is typically a really good place to start for you to start constructing what the story is for that area. It's just a better metric. It's just a better metric than hanging your hat on a forecasted crystal ball type of a methodology. Now, again, that does not change the fact that we do want to look at what's forecasted, and we can help you a lot with that, as well as your real estate people can help you a lot with that. Chamber of Commerce can help you a lot with that, and try to understand what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years for that area. Understanding what's going to drive that growth that's going to be in the area. You don't want to just say, hey, you know what, it's going to grow, 2% or 3% per year or whatever that is. Why? You've got to answer that why. Why is it going to grow that way? Is it because there is a big, and we saw this in Austin, Texas, as an example. We saw this in Austin when Tesla built a big factory there. There was a couple of other factories. I think Amazon built one down there. And so that drove a lot of job growth, and that changed a lot of those communities on the type of people that are in there in a really positive way. For you doctors in Austin, many of you are just knocking it out of the park. Why? Because you're the beneficiary of a lot of that growth that's happening. So you've got to understand those economic peaks and valleys, why they're happening, and then whether it's a short-term benefit or problem, or it's a long-term benefit or problem. For example, if you're in an area, and I'll pick on Chicago for a second, Chicago has been it's been a hard area politically, business-friendly wise, and so and that's been a long-term challenge and problem. And so we hope, of course, that will change, but that's an area where doctors are having a hard time growing at times because of some of that environment. I'm not picking on Chicago. Chicago's a great area. A lot of doctors are doing amazing in Chicago, and I'm glad that you are. But that is an area that you've got to understand what's happening in that community. Really, when you look at growth, we kind of use the 1% annual growth as kind of an unwritten benchmark for the growth in the area. We'll have a lot of areas that are growing, 3, 5, even 7% annually sometimes, but that's not something that's obviously sustainable. But again, it is a number that is going to impact everything else. Now we see a lot of areas that are growing, 0.5% or 0.25%, and that's good, healthy growth. But like I say, we like to keep it around that 1% number because we feel like generally that is kind of a really healthy amount for an area. Once they settle down from the big boom, again, when we look at an Austin or something that's affected by an event, we want to see it go back into that 1% zone and feel like that's probably where they ought to be. Okay, let's talk specifically about population numbers. And I should mention that if you're just listening to this, number one, thank you for listening to it. Number two, we do have, I'm following a presentation, a PowerPoint with this. It has some visuals. So if you would like to see the visual side of this, please go to our YouTube channel, drdemographics.com, or more ideally would be to go to our website, drdemographics.com/blog. and that will bring you to where we post this video so that you can watch it right there on the website uninterrupted. So yes, it'll be on YouTube, but it will also be on our website, drdemographics.com/blog. So let's talk about population numbers for a moment. One of the things that I always talk about when we're helping a doctor find an area that's going to work for them is really matching age demographics and different segmentation in the age groups to what it is that they're wanting to do. The worst thing that you could possibly do is find an area that has a particular high number of a particular segment of the age, but then go in there with the expectation of a different type of practice. As an example, if you're going to an area that has a predominant adult population of 45 to 65, probably a pediatric office is going to struggle. Now, there's probably going to be some families and you will stay busy, but you may not be able to be busy enough or what you need or what your partners want as far as final revenue, just because there's just not enough people. And so age segments, we want to make sure that it's matching the practice focus that you have and the goals that you have for your practice, and make sure all those numbers line up. And so when you're thinking, okay, I'm going to open a new practice in this part of town, who lives there? What type of age groups lives there, and do they have enough of a need in that age segment to match the type of practice that you're trying to provide? We also want to look at, and when it talks about population, we want to talk about drive time. Now, in our reports, many of you have gotten our reports in the past, we typically will show drive time and zip code population. The reason we do that is because, number one, we don't live our life according to zip codes, and I would lump circle radiuses into that. We don't live our life in a circle, but we do live our life according to drive time. When I think of where I'm sitting right now in my office and how far is Chipotle, or how far is the school that I need to go pick up my kids, or how far is the gym, or whatever it is, I know exactly what that is, and I do so in drive time. I don't think, the kids are in a different zip code and it takes me X amount of time to drive from the zip code I'm in to the zip code. That's not how my brain works, and that's not how your brain works or anybody else's brain. It's always in drive time. And so the drive time population, which we break out into 5, 10, and 15-minute segments, is, in my opinion, probably the most true population number that you're going you are going to need to look at for your practice. Who is it that was within that 5-minute drive time? Are they the right people? And if the people that are in the 5-minute drive time that live there, that could be very different from the daytime population, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I just want to make sure that the people that are around me are the ones that are most likely to use my practice. We want to look at the legacy practices and the average age of the patients and the doctor. Are they aging out? So, for example, we've seen an area that was once a young family type of an area that was driven by a new employer or whatever. So you have a lot of pediatric and orthodontic patients, but then that population over the years, they aged out. Kids went to high school, then they went to college, and then they were gone. And so the patient numbers dropped pretty significantly, and what was once a thriving orthodontic office is now focused on capturing a larger segment of the population for orthodontic kids, percentage of the market, even though the market has shrunk, but also really relies on adult ortho, and that's how they're trying to survive. And so you got to gauge that, right? You've got to see, all right, is this an area where that average age is not gonna be beneficial to us? And I should say, I'm using a lot of dental examples here. Obviously, a large majority of our clients are dental, but this is true for an optometrist. This is true for a veterinary office. This is true for a lot of different professional practice environments. So don't let me turn you off by just using dental examples. We do want to look at, and let's talk about that daytime population. We will break out for you what the total population is for the people that live in a particular area, but also the daytime population, right? If we were to look at a downtown New York or downtown Chicago or one of these areas practice, The people that maybe live right there are not your ideal patient. However, during the day, and people are there for work, it very much could be your primary population. And so knowing what those daytime population numbers are, really, really important. And so we want to make sure that we're hitting those right benchmarks, that we know exactly where you're at, that we know who and where and what when it comes to the population size. And I guess saturation would be the other one. We don't want to have too many doctors for too many offices. And so making sure that we're hitting those benchmarks is really where we need to be. So let's talk about the fine details. And this is where we start bringing in all of the factors that maybe are a little uncomfortable to talk about. However, when it comes to demographics, it becomes really, really important for you to understand and to really fill out the story of who it is that you're working with or potentially could be working with in your area. And it includes race, ethnicity, gender, and then understanding the psychography of what's happening with the people that live there. So you need to answer these questions. Do they have a cultural reason to make a decision on who it is that they want their provider? So if they are Korean, are they going to really be seeking after a Korean provider? And if you're moving your practice into an area that has a high Korean population and you're not Korean, then you've got to make it an educated decision there is the need strong enough for that population? And I'm just using Korean as an example. I'm not saying that that's how it is, but do I provide something to these people that is going to be compelling enough to make have them make a decision that's not going to be cultural or have anything to do with that ethnicity? You want to be able to look at, as an example, we talk about unique selling position a lot. And a female doctor oftentimes will appeal to a certain market segment more than others. So, for example, a lot of pediatric and orthodontic doctors that are female have a unique selling position that not everybody can have. And certainly there are people in a segment of the population that are going to seek after that because they feel like they might have a more gentle touch, right? Now, all these are broad generalizations that are probably not true. However, when you're talking about marketing and you're talking about demography, you're trying to write what the story is for your area so you can make the best investment possible for your practice location. And so when we talk about these unique selling position items, you really have to enter the arena. You have to put on your helmet and your sword and all those things, and you're on the battlefield because your competition is going to be using everything for them. And going back to our earlier example, that Korean doctor is going to use the fact that he's Korean to capture as much of the Korean population as he can, right? You would too if you were in that situation. And so again, when it comes to unique selling position, you've got to make sure that you're using what you have to be able to do that. The other thing you want to look at, and especially if you're in Texas or Arizona or California, is you've got to look at the level of generational immigrants that you have. Are they a first-generation immigrant or are they a third-generation immigrant? Because those views are going to be, and we've done other episodes on the Americanization of immigrants and how it increases generation to generation. That may change drastically what your approach is on marketing to that particular segment of the population. And in reality, you've just got to set yourself up for success, right? If you're in an area that has 45% Hispanic population in California, you better have a front desk person that speaks Spanish, right? You need to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success there. If you are going to be in an area that has a high number of Medicaid patients, you better have somebody that knows how to use Medicaid, right? And be able to do all the paperwork and all the stuff that goes along with that. And so you've got to understand that at a level that's really, really important. And so when you're looking at, hey, this location's awesome, the real estate's available, it's a great price, that's all wonderful, but you've got to look at some of these other factors as well and make sure that it matches up with the story of your practice that you're putting out into the marketplace once you open the doors. And really, you've got to know the why, right? And you've got to understand your why, and you've got to understand your potential patient's why. And that's where psychography comes into play and becomes so, so important. And that is a really, really long topic that we'll handle in a different presentation. But psychography becomes one of the most important and absolute hidden secrets when it comes to marketing, in my opinion, for a successful practice or just an average practice or even a failing practice. Let's talk about location specifically and practice placement. One of the most common questions we get is, should I go, should I go next to Whole Foods, or should I go to Walmart, next to Walmart, or should I go to, next to Costco, or, and those areas are really expensive, should I go to a less expensive option that maybe is off the beaten path a little bit? And I always tell people that the money is really pretty even between the two. And the reason why is if you go to an office that's next to Walmart, you're going to pay a premium for that location. Why? Because Walmart's bringing, thousands and thousands of people in every day to drive past your practice. And you don't get that for free. You pay for that. That's part of your marketing. You just happen to pay for it in your lease and not necessarily in an external marketing method or tool. Now, if you're buying cheap or you're leasing cheap and it's off the beaten path and you don't have a traffic driving magnet like Walmart that's going to bring people through your practice, you're going to end up spending your money, marketing money, on driving people to your practice, right? You're going to be running more ads. You're going to be running all these things to get people that are going to drive to your practice without automatically driving it. And so, is it exactly even? Of course not. It depends on the area, but you're going to spend money either way. And so I wouldn't ever say that one is better than the other. It really is case by case. You've got to understand how those natural magnets impact the traffic flow, which includes a median, right? Or which includes, a murder that happened on that corner, 5 years ago that everybody knows about. There's all these different things that can positively and negatively impact the traffic flow for your particular area. You've got to look at that location history, the tangibles, the things that, is there a giant empty building that's next to you looks a little run down and has some garbage out in the front of it because they were emptying it and they never finished or whatever. You've got to look at that. And again, the tangibles and then the non-tangibles, again, if something terrible happened there, or if there's been 10 other dental offices or veterinary offices in that location, they never do well, that location kind of gets the stink on it a little bit. And so you better do something pretty dramatic to kind of break the method with there. So that's something that's really important. You've got to understand the actual location. And again, if you've got a decent real estate person, they can certainly help you with that. Let's talk really quickly, and I know we're already going long here, but let's talk about income, education, and housing status. So these are some things that are, I would say, not absolutely ideal, but would be, or I'm not absolutely necessary, but would be ideal if you can find it. Number one, you have a tremendous marketing advantage if you live where you work, and not everybody wants to do that. I totally understand that. If you want to not run into your patients at Costco, and so you want to live on the other side of town, great. Makes total sense, and I understand that completely. But if you do want to live close, especially if you've got the kids in the schools and that kind of thing, you are going to have a benefit if you live where you work or live close to where you work. The other thing, looking at income levels, rich or poor is both fine, right? It just has to match what you want and the practice you're building. You don't want to build a high-end cosmetic practice in a poverty area, and you don't want to build on the cheap and kind of take over a rundown practice in a posh area. Like, those things will not match up, and you'll suffer because of that. When it comes to income, and you'll get a lot of different numbers, median income by far is the best view of what's really going on in the area. Don't look at the average, don't look at the per capita. There's a whole long explanation of why, but if you really want to know what the meat and potatoes are for your particular area, look at the median income and make sure that matches the what you're going to be providing. Again, if you're in an area that's making $45,000 a household per year on the median, they're probably not going to be doing a lot of full cosmetic treatments and work done in their for their family, right? They're just not going to do that because they don't have the money to do that. And so you've got to make sure that that median income matches what you want. You want to be looking at how many homeowners and how many home renters and the vacancy percentage. And again, none of that is good or bad except for maybe the vacancy. But if you have a low percent of owners and a high percent of renters, that's not bad. But you got to be ready for that. You've got to understand that those renters are, on average, in most areas, going to be moving a lot more often. And so your lifetime value with those patients is likely not going to be as long. And so you have got to be marketing a little bit more consistently. Now, on the other side, if you have a high percentage of homeowners, 70, 80%, that's awesome, right? Like once you land them as a patient, man, their lifetime value is going to be long. However, a lot of times those people already have a provider and they've been using the same guy for 15 years. And so it's a little harder for a brand new de novo practice to break into that market because people are set, right? And so you've got to come in with a really strong offer or a real bang, or there has to be something going on in that area. The doctor did something dumb that everybody knows about or something, right? Like there's got to be a reason why people are leaving them and coming to you. Vacancy, you really want it under 10%. When it gets up to 10%, we need to start answering the question of why. Why is the vacancy so high? Why is there a lot of dwellings that are empty, right? Like, what is the reason why? It might be because it's a retirement area, right? And so it's a snowbird area, which is totally fine. But it also could be that the area is just on its way down, and there's a lot of empty, burned out houses, and you certainly don't want to be anywhere near that for your practice. You need to understand white collar and blue collar. And again, it's one of those things that's neither of it's good or bad. We tend to think, those of us that, grew up in the 80s and 90s, we tend to think that white collar makes more money than blue collar. It's not always the case. There's a lot of areas that plumber, that electrician is making a heck of a lot more than the white collar workers that are there that are, working some kind of an office job. And so, really dependent on the area. But again, a lot of those blue collar people won't have any kind of a dental plan, won't have any dental insurance, whereas the white collar will more often. And so a lot of times in a blue collar, high blue collar area, which is typically over 20%, you've got to make sure that you have an in-house plan, right? Because that works really well with those people. And lastly is educational attainment. The studies are pretty clear that the higher amount of education that a person has, the more apt they're going to be to take care of their health, right? And to go to the regular appointments. And so educational attainment is always an important thing to understand and to know. So high level, guys, that is a high level view of a few things that you should be looking at, a few of the many, right? When you're looking at a new location, especially if it's de novo, especially if it's one that you're going to put your heart and soul into and a lot of your money, right? Like you've got to make sure this thing hits really, really well. So please jump on our website, drdemographics.com. Number one, go ahead and get a report from us. If you haven't had one for a while, let's get the updated demographics. You would do that on the site viability report. If you have questions, please call me, 844-704-0499. And you're always welcome to email me, mike@drdemographics.com. I'm always happy to talk to you. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have questions about anything that I talked about today, shoot me a quick email. Just let me know. You can jump on the website and use our chat feature. That is usually me that's monitoring that. Other times it's other staff members, but that's usually me. So if you have a question, feel free to reach out. And with that, we'll see you on the next episode.